You will quickly discover that all of my cultural references come from a period of about 1985 to 1995. So any movies I reference, any music that makes its way into the messages that I'm paying attention to, or any TV shows, they generally start then and end 1995 or so, which probably means I need to update that. But I do want to share with you what I am calling today the gospel according to Seinfeld.
Jerry, tonight for a real treat. I'm personally going to pay the dinner for you and Audrey.
Jerry, you okay?
Huh?
Is anything wrong?
Nothing.
You look like you've seen a ghost.
Is it?
Oh, wait till you taste this. Poppy's perfect.
Well,
Jerry, have some. You're not going to taste it? Jerry.
So, Poppy the chef did not wash his hands before returning to work. Seinfeld was so disturbed that he informed the local health department, which did not result in an A+ rating for Poppy's restaurant. They shut the place down, which I think makes a good introduction to this story about Jesus. Now, when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. There are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition.'" Then he called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." So, Jesus and his disciples were not hand washers. And there were some there who were trying to shut them down. Read back into the chapter right before this. They had just fed fish and bread to several thousand people. And now it's like the public health department has shown up over some complaints about cleanliness. I mean, who is in the wrong here? Is it the Pharisees and scribes who are raising the question about unwashed hands? Or is it Jesus and his disciples for having unwashed hands? Because the gospel writer seems to be trying to get us to take sides with Jesus here. But the fact is that you and I have just as many cultural expectations and health regulations biased against Jesus. In this case, employees must wash their hands before returning to work, the sign reads in the restroom. Have you washed your hands for supper? A parent asks every day of a child. The tradition goes that cleanliness is next to godliness. The Centers for Disease Control tells us to help prevent the spread of disease, wash your hands. And you know, a teacher on a field trip will practically hose down her students with hand sanitizer. Is that the same thing, hand sanitizer? Is that the same as washing your hands? Does hand sanitizer replace running water and soap? Because if you go to a porta potty, that's what you're going to find, a big dispenser of hand sanitizer. I do believe that people are more likely to use that, by the way. It's quick and it's easy. There's no drying involved. It smells good. And there are, I promise you, there are people who only wash their hands if someone else is in the bathroom. But they'll use hand sanitizer, I think. Is it the same thing? I've wondered. But people who really know the science of germs, doctors, nurses, health officials, or anyone who's ever been really ill from bacterial infections, those people can be downright religious in their hand washing. Do you like what I did there? Religious? Because really, what is so wrong or bad about religious expectations of the people who are confronting Jesus and his disciples for not washing their hands? I mean, there are all kinds of laws in the books of Deuteronomy or Leviticus that sometimes strike us as, ancient taboos and prejudices, because they prescribe restrictions on who's allowed to go to the temple, for example, in Jerusalem. Or they force people with certain diseases to live separated from their communities, and that strikes us as odd sometimes. It's a dreaded condition, to be sure. Because you have a frightening disease, and then on top of it, all of your relationships get interrupted or severed completely because of these laws. And so stories of Jesus healing lepers and people with hemorrhages have particular power, and they have poignant undercurrents of grace and love, because Jesus does not just eradicate their physical ailments. He makes it possible for them to be restored into a community where people belong. Often, however, what strikes us as some kind of ancient cruelty, they may really be more about public health as any notions that we think might be about religious purity. Here's what I mean. Even with a limited understanding of medicine, Ancient people were very aware that large gatherings of people, such as would happen at the temple in Jerusalem, large gatherings of people were places where diseases could get spread very quickly, and even ancient people knew this. What do we tell people who are sick with the flu, by the way? Stay home. Stay home until you are better so that you don't give it to all the rest of us. Are the Pharisees way off track here, confronting Jesus? Those boys weren't washing their hands before eating. And they were serving other people. And when they asked Jesus about it, well, he kind of snapped, didn't he? You hypocrites. And there are some pieces here in the story that I glossed over. The Pharisees asked him about hand washing. And Jesus at one point then accused them of negating one of the 10 commandments, to honor your mother and father. Oh, this was actually an intricate legal argument having to do with how a person might avoid taking care of his aging parents by instead setting aside his resources as a promised gift to the temple. This was an oath that could later be revoked. So you could, in theory, set your resources aside for the temple until your parents passed away, thereby not taking care of them, and then revoke the oath after they're dead and regain all of your possessions. This was the oath of Korban. And if someone really was selfish enough or spiteful enough, he could do that and let his parents fend for themselves. And Jesus was not the only one making this argument in those days, but boy, he really snapped over the hand washing, which probably means there was something else going on for him rather than questions of public health and cleanliness. Do you know, he sensed a motive behind their question. Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders? Did you hear that? You see, asking about the disciples is a direct challenge to the teachings of their master. It's like asking a teacher about her students' test scores. Why can't your students pass this section of the state test? Oh, Jesus sensed a motive. These people were trying to discredit him in front of the crowds who had gathered around him. And as disturbing as the lack of hand washing before meals may be to us, the question itself was asked in order to call the entire legitimacy of Jesus into question. If the disciples are not following the traditions of the elders, then that teacher must not be qualified to teach them about God. See how that works? Jesus did, and they really stepped in it. Little secret. It turns out that Jesus knows his Bible very well. He quotes the prophets. He quotes the law. And he got down to brass tacks as far as what the scriptures actually say and what they actually mean. And when it came to all the extra teachings and interpretations and traditions that people would take so seriously, as if they were as important as what the scriptures are actually trying to accomplish, well, you heard it. Jesus told them what for. he was, I think, more than qualified to teach about God. And when you get right down to it, all of this religious stuff we learn, right? It is all trying to point us toward God, who can have a profound impact upon our hearts and souls. But we can get caught up in the details of the religious stuff, as if that's what matters the most. The songs we sing, I guess, the ways that we dress, how the deacons line up and march in for the communion and offering and march out, how clean the place is, how well we can quote this or that. Have you ever seen the deacons marching in and out, by the way? It's really cool. It's very intricate, very rehearsed, very practiced, very important. But we can get caught up in the religious stuff without allowing it to truly point us toward God. And so in this way, Jesus says we can miss the point. Jesus and his people had religious understandings about food, and that's great, because keeping kosher can profoundly affect how people identify with God every time they sit down for a meal. But the food itself is not what makes the difference. The God it is meant to point towards, that is who changes the heart and soul. Jesus said, you know this, food goes right in and right out, and it never touches the heart. In other words, the religious stuff can replace, if we're not careful, the stuff of religion. Are you with me? Jesus got so angry because people were losing the big picture in the minutia of what concerned them every day. They could not see the forest for the trees, as they say. They could not see the forest for the trees. You know, there's a humanitarian crisis with all of those refugees streaming out of Syria. And the scriptures teach us to care for the stranger, to feed the hungry, to seek justice. But they're worried about washing hands. There's a neighbor sitting right next to us who is going through an unspeakable trial with her family. We know the stories where Jesus demonstrates love for the brokenhearted. They are worried about washing hands. The factory is closing. The homeless are displaced with new bridge construction taking place. The father down the street is being deployed for 6 months. The kid in class in the third row is confused about who he is attracted to, and how his family will react. They are worried about washing hands. They are worried about washing hands, but Jesus is not worried about that. With grace and love, Jesus is worried about us.